Imagine stepping into a dimly lit castle in 16th century Hungary, where whispers of horror echo through the stone walls. A noblewoman, beautiful and powerful, hides a secret so dark it could stain the pages of history forever. Chapter 1: The Noble Bloodline, Elizabeth Báthory's early life. And picture this. It's the late 1500s in the Kingdom of Hungary, a time when empires clash. Nobles wield immense power, and family ties mean everything. Our story begins with a girl born into one of the most influential families in Europe. Elizabeth Báthory, or Elizabeth Báthory, as she was known in her native tongue, entered the world on August 7th, 1560, in Nyobata, a town nestled in what is now eastern Hungary. Her family wasn't just wealthy, they were practically royalty. The Báthory clan had produced kings, cardinals, and war heroes, including her uncle Stephen Báthory, who became King of Poland. From the cradle, Elizabeth was surrounded by luxury, education, and the kind of privilege that shaped her into a formidable woman. But beneath that glittering surface, there were hints of darkness in her lineage, rumors of madness, cruelty, and even occult interests that ran through the family. Blood like a hidden vein. Let's dive deeper into her upbringing to understand how this noble girl grew into the figure of legend. Elizabeth was the daughter of Baron George Báthory and Anna Báthory, who were actually cousins, a common practice among nobility to keep power consolidated. This inbreeding might explain some of the health issues that plagued the family, including epilepsy, which Elizabeth herself suffered from as a child. Historical records suggest she experienced severe seizures, possibly influencing her later temperament. By age 11, she was betrothed to Ferenc Nadasdy, a count from another powerful family, in a strategic alliance that would merge two dynasties. They married when she was just 15, in 1575, at Vranov Castle, in a lavish ceremony attended by over 4,500 guests. Think flowing wine, elaborate feasts, and political maneuvering disguised as celebration. Ferenc was often away fighting the Ottomans as the Black Knight of Hungary, leaving Elizabeth to manage their vast estates, including the infamous Čachtice Castle, which would later become synonymous with her alleged horrors as a young countess. Elizabeth wasn't your typical sheltered noblewoman. She was educated in Latin, German, and Greek, rare for women of her era, and she took an active role in running the household. She bore at least 5 children, though only 3 survived infancy: Anna, Orsolia, and PL. Managing properties across Hungary, Slovakia, and beyond, she oversaw everything from agriculture to justice, doling out punishments to serfs who crossed her. This era was brutal. Torture was legal for extracting confessions, and nobles had near absolute power over their subjects. Elizabeth's letters reveal a sharp mind. She corresponded with kings and handled finances astutely, but whispers of her temper emerged early. Servants spoke of harsh beatings for minor infractions, like a maid who didn't sew a hem straight. Was this just the norm for a strict aristocrat, or the seeds of something sinister? To give you a practical sense of her world, consider the daily life in her castles. Mornings might involve reviewing accounts with stewards, afternoons dictating letters, or visiting villagers, and evenings hosting dignitaries. Elizabeth was known for her beauty-pale skin, dark hair, and a commanding presence that turned heads. She invested in cosmetics and herbal remedies, perhaps fueling later myths about her obsession with youth. Examples from her life show a blend of benevolence and ruthlessness. She founded a gynecological hospital in one castle, helping women with childbirth, yet she allegedly tortured servants for entertainment. Historians debate these claims, but court records from her later trial mention early incidents, like the death of a servant girl under mysterious circumstances around 1585. One relatable tip for understanding historical figures like Elizabeth: always separate fact from fiction by cross-referencing sources. For instance, her epilepsy might have been misinterpreted as demonic possession in a superstitious age, adding to her mystique. Practical advice: if you're researching genealogy or history for fun, start with primary sources like family letters. Survive and paint a picture of a woman who was intelligent but isolated, especially after her husband's death in 1604 from battle wounds. Wrapping up this glimpse into her origins, we see Elizabeth as a product of her time, privileged, educated, and empowered in ways few women were. But as her power grew unchecked, so did the shadows around her. This sets the stage for what comes next: her marriage and the escalating rumors that would turn a countess into a monster. Stay tuned for Chapter 2, where we explore her union with the Black Knight and the first cracks in her facade. Chapter 2: The Black Knight's Bride. Elizabeth's marriage and power step into the grand halls of Čachtice Castle, where a young countess is navigating a world of power, politics, and a marriage that would shape her destiny. After her lavish wedding to Ferenc Nadasti in Tisha, Elizabeth Báthory stepped fully into her role as countess, managing vast estates while her husband waged war against the Ottoman Empire. This chapter dives into the dynamics of her marriage, the responsibilities she shouldered, and the first whispers of cruelty that began to swirl around her name, setting the stage for her infamous legend. Elizabeth's marriage to Ferenc was more than a union of love, it was a political powerhouse. Ferenc, known as the Black Knight of Hungary, was a celebrated warrior, often away leading campaigns. This left Elizabeth, still in her teens, to govern their sprawling properties, from Čachtice to Asavia and beyond. She wasn't just a figurehead. She was hands-on, overseeing everything from grain harvests to local disputes. Imagine a young woman, barely 20, signing orders to collect taxes or punish lawbreakers in a time when nobles could whip or brand serfs without question. Her letters from this period show a sharp, commanding tone. She wrote to local officials demanding loyalty and efficiency, revealing a woman who thrived on control. But what was life like in this marriage? Ferenc was a soldier, hardened by battle, and historical accounts suggest he wasn't exactly a gentle soul. Some sources claim he taught Elizabeth harsher methods of discipline, like coating a servant in honey and leaving them for insects as punishment. Whether true or exaggerated, these stories paint a picture of a couple united by ambition but strained by distance. Elizabeth bore children during these years, raising them amid her duties, but Ferenc's long absences left her isolated. She surrounded herself with loyal servants and advisors, including Anna Dvulia, a woman later accused of witchcraft, who became her confidant. This isolation might have fueled her growing reputation for severity. Servants began to talk of her temper flaring over small mistakes, like a poorly polished goblet or a misstep in a dance. To ground this in something tangible, let's look at Čachtice Castle itself. It was a fortress perched on a hill, with thick stone walls and a labyrinth of rooms, perfect for a noblewoman wielding power, but also a place where secrets could hide. Elizabeth held court here, hosting banquets for allies while managing a household of dozens, from cooks to stable hands. Court records from later years mention incidents from this time: a maid who fell from a window, another who died after a beating gone too far. These were dismissed as accidents, but they planted seeds of suspicion among locals. In a superstitious age, people started whispering about curses or dark forces surrounding the Countess. Here's a practical tip for diving into this era. If you're exploring historical mysteries, pay attention to the cultural context. The late 16th century was steeped in fear of witchcraft and the supernatural. A noblewoman like Elizabeth, educated and assertive, could easily be painted as unnatural by rivals or fearful peasants. Try digging into local folklore or court documents. From the time many are digitized now to see how rumors spread. For example, a 1590s report from a nearby village mentioned strange cries from Lactis at night. Though it's unclear if this was fact or fear-fueled gossip, as Elizabeth's power grew, so did her independence. By the 1590s, she was not just a wife, but a force, negotiating with nobles and even aiding Florence's military efforts by sending supplies. Yet, the more control she gained, the more stories of her cruelty surfaced. Were these tales born of jealousy, political intrigue, or truth? That's the question we'll unravel as her story darkens. This chapter leaves us with Elizabeth at the height of her influence, a countess commanding respect and fear in equal measure. But with Florence's health declining and her isolation deepening, the stage is set for a turning point. Next, we'll explore the pivotal moment of her husband's death and how it unleashed a new chapter in her bloody legend. Stay tuned for Chapter 3. Chapter 3, Widow's Reign. The turning point after Florence's death. The year is 1604. And Lactis Castle feels emptier without Florence Nadasti, the Black Knight who died suddenly from battle wounds. Elizabeth Báthory, now Cichesir and a widow, stands at a crossroads. No longer bound by her husband's shadow, she's free to rule her estates alone, but this freedom comes with darker rumors that begin to spiral. This chapter explores how Florence's death unleashed a new phase in Elizabeth's life, where power, isolation, and whispers of horror grew louder. With Florence gone, Elizabeth inherited full control of their vast holdings, managing lands that stretched across modern-day Slovakia and Hungary. She was a single mother to her surviving children, navigating a male-dominated world of politics. Her letters show her fiercely protecting her family's wealth, even clashing with relatives over inheritance. But isolation took its toll. Without Florence's military prestige to shield her, Elizabeth leaned on loyal servants like Anna d'Arvoulia and a new circle of confidants. Some later accused of enabling her worst impulses. Villagers began reporting missing girl servants or peasants who entered the castle and never returned. A 1604 record notes a local priest refusing to bury a maid's body, citing unnatural marks. Picture Lactis at night, a looming fortress where torches flicker and whispers carry. Elizabeth, still beautiful and commanding, hosted lavish parties to maintain alliances, but stories spread of her obsession with youth and beauty. Servants claimed she consulted herbalists and alchemists, seeking potions to preserve her looks. These tales, mixed with missing girls, fueled local fear. Were these just superstitions, or was something sinister brewing? A tip for history buffs: check church records from this period. They often reveal what nobles tried to hide, like unexplained deaths. Elizabeth's actions were still protected by her status, but cracks were forming. Next, we'll dive into the escalating accusations and the chilling myths that began to define her legacy. Chapter 4: Whispers of Blood. The rise of the Báthory legend. The year is 1605, and the air around Lactis Castle grows heavy with fear. Elizabeth Báthory, now a widow wielding unchecked power, is at the center of growing rumors that paint her as something more than a strict noblewoman, something monstrous. This chapter delves into the chilling tales that began to spread across Hungary, as whispers of missing girls and gruesome acts turned Elizabeth into a figure of dread, laying the foundation for her infamous legend. As Elizabeth managed her estates, stories of her cruelty escalated. Peasants in nearby villages noticed young women, often poor girls seeking work, as maids vanishing after entering Čachtice. By 1605, local gossip claimed dozens had disappeared, with some estimates reaching as high as 80 over a few years. These weren't just rumors. Church records from the time note complaints to local clergy about strange deaths and bodies found with unusual wounds, like cuts or burns. One account describes a girl's body discovered in a field, drained of blood, sparking tales that Elizabeth bathed in blood to stay young. This myth, likely exaggerated, took root in a superstitious era obsessed with the occult. Imagine the scene: a village tavern buzzing with hushed voices, sharing stories of the Countess's nighttime rituals. Servants who fled Lactus spoke of torture chambers in the castle's depths, where Elizabeth and her inner circle, Darvulia, a supposed witch, and others like Ilona J. and Doratia, Shantessel, allegedly tormented victims. These accounts, later used in her trial, described punishments like burning hands or sewing lips shut for gossiping. Were these acts real, or were they tales spun by disgruntled servants and political enemies? Elizabeth's wealth and influence made her a target. Rival nobles coveted her lands, and her defiance as a powerful widow didn't help. For a practical angle, consider how rumors spread in the 17th century. Without modern media, tales grew through word of mouth, often distorted. If you're researching this period, look into trial testimonies or letters from local officials. Many are preserved in Hungarian archives. One 1606 letter from a local magistrate mentions unnatural practices at Lactus, hinting at early investigations. These documents show how fear and power clashed, turning Elizabeth into a symbol of evil. The blood-bathing legend, though iconic, is debated. Historians note that blood rituals were a common trope used to demonize powerful women, yet the sheer number of missing girls lent credence to the horror. Elizabeth's status still shielded her, but the whispers were growing too loud to ignore. This sets the stage for the storm that would soon break over Lactus. Next, we'll explore the political machinations and the investigation that finally brought the Countess's actions into the open. Stay tuned for Chapter 5. Chapter 5: The Net Titans, Investigations and Political Intrigue. By 1610. The rumors swirling around Čachtice Castle have reached the ears of powerful men in Hungary's royal court. Elizabeth Báthory's unchecked power as a wealthy widow draws envy and suspicion, and the whispers of missing girls can no longer be ignored. This chapter uncovers how political enemies and a determined investigator began to close in on the Countess, turning village gossip into a formal inquiry that threatened her empire. The spark came from Georgi Thurzo, Hungary's Palatine and a distant relative of Elizabeth. Tasked with maintaining order, Thurzo received complaints from local clergy and nobles about the disappearances. By late 1610, he launched an investigation, driven partly by duty and partly by political motives. Elizabeth's vast wealth and influence made her a target. Her lands were coveted, and her defiance as a single woman ruling alone ruffled feathers. Thurzo collected testimonies from villagers and former servants, who spoke of girls lured to the castle with promises of work, only to vanish. One account from a fleeing maid described seeing a blood-soaked room in Vactus's lower levels, though she escaped before confirming more. Picture the tension. Elizabeth, unaware of the growing storm, continued hosting lavish gatherings, her beauty and charm masking the fear spreading beyond her walls. Meanwhile, Thurzo's men scoured the countryside, documenting stories of bodies found in rivers or hidden in castle cellars. A 1610 report lists 25 missing girls from nearby villages, with some witnesses claiming they saw Elizabeth's servants disposing of remains at night. The investigation wasn't just about justice. It was a power play. King Matthias II, burdened by debts, saw a chance to seize Báthory lands if she was convicted. Elizabeth's own cousin, Gábor Báthory, a rival noble, also stood to gain from her downfall. The evidence piled up. Servants like Alona J. and Doratia Shontes, once loyal, began to crack under questioning, admitting to disposing of bodies, but claiming they acted on Elizabeth's orders. Whether coerced or truthful, their statements painted a grim picture. Yet, Elizabeth's noble status made her untouchable. Nobles couldn't be arrested without hard proof. Thurzo needed a dramatic move to catch her in the act, and he was planning just that. This chapter leaves Elizabeth on the brink, her world of power and privilege teetering as the investigation closes in. Next, we'll witness the dramatic raid on Čachtice Castle and the shocking discoveries that sealed her fate. Stay tuned for Chapter 6. Chapter 6. The Raid on Čachtice. The Fall of a Countess. December 29th, 1610. And the snow-dusted hills around Čachtice Castle are silent, but not for long. G.Y. Thurzo, Hungary's Palatine, leads a band of armed men to the fortress, under cover of night, ready to confront Elizabeth Báthory with the accusations that have haunted her for years. This chapter dives into the dramatic raid that shattered her world, revealing horrors that would cement her legend as the Blood Countess. Thurzo's men stormed Čachtice with a warrant from King Matthias II, acting on months of gathered evidence. As they breached the castle gates, they found a scene that chilled even the hardened soldiers. According to trial records, they discovered a young girl's body in the courtyard, pale and marked with wounds, as if freshly killed. Inside, the air was thick with dread. Servants scattered, some confessing on the spot, pointing to Elizabeth as the mastermind. In the lower chambers, Thurzo's men allegedly found more bodies, girls with signs of torture, some half buried in shallow graves. One report claims a ledger was seized, listing names of dozens of victims, though its authenticity is debated. Imagine the chaos. Elizabeth, caught off guard, stood defiant in her grand hall, her noble status her only shield. She denied everything, claiming the dead were victims of plague or accidents, but the evidence was damning. Servants like Alona J. and a young man named Janos Javeri, known as Fichko, gave detailed accounts of torture girls chained, beaten, or burned for Elizabeth's amusement. The castle's walls, once a symbol of her power, now trapped her as witnesses turned. Thurzo arrested her accomplices on the spot, but Elizabeth's rank spared her immediate chains. Instead, she was confined to her chambers, a prisoner in her own home. The raid wasn't just a legal move. It was a spectacle meant to break her influence. Nobles and clergy gathered, whispering of blood rituals and dark magic, fueling the mythos. Whether the discoveries were exaggerated to justify seizing her lands or reflected true horrors, the raid marked the end of Elizabeth's reign. This moment leaves Čachtice in uproar, with Elizabeth's fate hanging by a thread. Next, uncover the trial that gripped Hungary and the shocking testimonies that painted her as a monster. Stay tuned for Chapter 7. Chapter 7. The Trial of the Century. Accusations and Testimonies. In early 1611, the grand halls of Čachtice Castle become the stage for one of Hungary's most sensational trials. Elizabeth Báthory, confined to Lactis, but not yet in chains, faces accusations that could destroy her legacy. This chapter explores the gripping trial led by Zsági Thurzo, where shocking testimonies from servants and villagers paint a portrait of horror, while Elizabeth's noble status keeps her just out of reach. The trial began on January 2nd, 1611, with Thurzo presiding over a court packed with nobles, clergy, and curious onlookers. Elizabeth, as a noblewoman, wasn't required to appear in person, but her accomplices Ilona J. Doratia, Shontes, Anna Darvulia, who had died before the trial, and Janos Jevery faced the judges. Over 300 witnesses testified, many claiming to have seen or heard of girls tortured and killed at Lactis. One servant, a girl named Susanna, described how Elizabeth burned victims with hot irons or cut them with knives, sometimes watching with a cold smile. Another witness, a local peasant, swore he saw bodies dumped in a nearby river at night. The court records list gruesome details: girls starved, frozen, or mutilated, with estimates of victims ranging from 36 to over 600. Picture the courtroom. A tense mix of fear and fascination as servants, likely coerced or tortured themselves, spilled secrets. The judges heard tales of a hidden chamber where Elizabeth allegedly conducted blood rituals, though no physical evidence of such a room was presented. Her accomplices didn't deny the deaths, but claimed they acted under her orders, hoping to save themselves. Political motives loomed large. King Matthias II and rival nobles stood to gain Elizabeth's wealth if she was convicted. Yet, her status protected her from direct prosecution. Noblewomen could only be tried with overwhelming proof, and Elizabeth's denials were fierce, sent via letters proclaiming her innocence. The trial's outcome was swift for her servants. Ilona and Dorothea were sentenced to death, their fingers torn out before being burned at the stake. Janos faced beheading. Elizabeth, however, remained untouchable for now, her fate left to Thurzo and the king. The testimonies, whether true or fueled by fear and greed, solidified her as a monster in the public's eyes. This chapter leaves Elizabeth teetering on the edge of ruin, her name now synonymous with evil. Next, we'll explore her final punishment and the walls that closed in around her. Stay tuned for Chapter 8. Chapter 8. A Living Tomb. Elizabeth's Punishment and Imprisonment by mid-1611. The trial's echoes still ripple through Hungary, and Elizabeth's Báthory as fate hangs in the balance. Though spared execution due to her noble status, she faces a punishment as chilling as her alleged crimes. This chapter uncovers the grim final act of her public life, as Čachtice Castle becomes her prison and her legend grows darker. After the trial, G. Thurzo, under pressure from King Matthias II, made a decision that sealed Elizabeth's fate without spilling noble blood. Rather than face a public execution, she was sentenced to lifelong house arrest in her own castle. In late 1611, masons were summoned to Lactis to wallop Elizabeth in a small set of rooms, likely in a tower with only tiny slits for air and food. Imagine the scene: the once powerful countess, surrounded by luxury, now confined to a stone cell, her world reduced to shadows and silence. Guards were posted to ensure she never left, and her contact with the outside was limited to a few trusted servants who passed her meals through the slits. Historical records are sparse, but letters from the time suggest Elizabeth was allowed to write to her children, pleading her innocence and accusing rivals of framing her for her wealth. Some accounts claim she spent her days praying or writing, while others say she raged against her confinement, her cries echoing through the castle. The villagers below, still reeling from the trial's horrors, saw her imprisonment as justice, though whispers of her supernatural powers, gruesome, even claimed she could curse from behind her walls. Her punishment was both a mercy and a torment. As a noblewoman, she escaped the stake that claimed her accomplices, but her living tomb was a slow death. Lactis, once her seat of power, became a monument to her downfall, with locals avoiding its shadow. The king and Thurzo gained control of her estates, fulfilling the political motives that had fueled the investigation. This chapter leaves Elizabeth locked away, her story fading into myth but not forgotten. Next, we'll explore her final days and the eerie circumstances surrounding her death. Stay tuned for Chapter 9. Chapter 9. The Final Shadows. Elizabeth's Death and Legacy. It's August 1614, and the walls of Čachtice Castle hold a fading figure. Elizabeth Báthory, once a commanding countess, now lingers in her stone prison, her health and spirit worn thin. This chapter explores the mysterious end of her life, and how her death only deepened the legend that would haunt history for centuries, confined to her sealed chambers. Elizabeth spent nearly 3 years in isolation. Historical accounts suggest she was frail by 1614, likely weakened by poor conditions and the toll of her confinement. On the night of August 21st, a guard noticed she was unusually quiet. Peering through a slit, he found her lifeless on her bed, her death unmarked by ceremony or witnesses. No official cause was recorded. Some whispered starvation, others illness, and some even claimed she took her own life, though her Catholic faith makes this unlikely. A local priest buried her quietly, possibly in Čachtice's churchyard, though her grave's exact location remains a mystery, fueling tales that her body was spirited away to hide her sins. Picture the eerie silence of Čachtice that night. The castle, once alive with her power, now a hollow shell. Her children, now grown, inherited what remained of her estates, but her name was already a curse. Villagers spoke of her ghost haunting the castle, and the blood-bathing myth grew, spread by pamphlets across Europe. By the 1700s, her story had morphed into a Gothic tale, blending fact with fiction. Some historians argue her crimes were exaggerated by rivals to seize her wealth, while others point to the sheer volume of testimonies as proof of her guilt. Elizabeth's death didn't end her story, it birthed a legend. From 17th century chronicles to modern novels, her name became synonymous with horror, inspiring tales of vampires and serial killers. Her true legacy, whether monster or scapegoat, remains debated, a puzzle locked in time. This chapter closes with Elizabeth's life extinguished, but her shadow looms large. Next, we'll unravel how her legend grew into a global myth and the truths we may never know. Stay tuned for Chapter 10. Chapter 10. The Eternal Countess. The birth of a global myth. The year is 1614, and Elizabeth Báthory's life has ended, her body cold within the stone walls of Čachtice Castle. Yet, her story is far from over. In the centuries that follow, her name transforms from that of a disgraced noblewoman into a chilling symbol of horror, a figure woven into tales of vampires, monsters, and the darkest corners of human imagination. This final chapter explores how Elizabeth's legend grew into a global myth, the debates over her guilt, and the enduring fascination that keeps her alive in books, films, and whispered campfire stories. As we close this tale, we'll sift through the layers of truth and fiction to understand why the Blood Countess still haunts us in the immediate aftermath of her death. Hungary buzzed with tales of the Countess who bathed in blood to preserve her youth. These stories, rooted in the trial testimonies of 1611, spread like wildfire through a Europe hungry for sensational tales. By the 1620s, handwritten pamphlet surly forms of tabloid news circulated in markets from Vienna to Venice, detailing her alleged crimes. One such pamphlet, printed in 1615, claimed she killed over 600 girls, a number likely inflated to shock readers. These accounts leaned heavily on the gruesome, describing torture devices like iron cages and spiked chairs, though no physical evidence of such tools was ever confirmed. The blood-bathing myth, in particular, gripped the public's imagination. In an era obsessed with alchemy and the supernatural, the idea of a noblewoman using virgin blood to defy aging seemed plausible, even if it was likely a fiction born of misogyny and fear of powerful women. Picture the 17th century. Scene: a tavern in Prague, where travelers share stories of the Hungarian countess, her beauty twisted into something demonic. These tales weren't just entertainment, they served a purpose. The Catholic Church, battling Protestantism and superstition, used Elizabeth's story to warn against vanity and sin. Meanwhile, her political enemies, including King Matthias II, benefited from her vilification, as it justified seizing her vast estates. Her children, particularly her daughter Anna, fought to preserve the family name, but the myth was unstoppable. By the 1700s, Jesuit scholars like Lscl Taraci published accounts that cemented her as a monster, blending trial records with embellishments. His 1729 book, Tragica Historia, was one of the first to mention the blood-bathing legend explicitly, claiming Elizabeth believed it would keep her youthful. As centuries passed, Elizabeth's story evolved with the times. In the 19th century, the rise of Gothic literature, think Bram Stoker's Dracula, found a perfect muse in the Blood Countess. Writers drew parallels between her and vampire lore, especially since Transylvania. Her family's homeland was already steeped in such myths. Her pale beauty, nocturnal reputation, and supposed bloodlust fit the archetype perfectly. By the 20th century, her tale leaped from books to film. Movies like Countess Dracula 1971 and The Bloody Countess 2009 leaned into the horror, portraying her as a sadistic villainess, often ignoring the historical nuances. Even today, her story inspires everything from novels to video games, like the Castlevania series, where characters echo her chilling legacy. But was Elizabeth truly the monster history made her out to be? Modern historians are divided. Some, like Hungarian scholar Eliseel Nagy, argue she was a victim of a political conspiracy, her wealth equivalent to millions today, and her status as a powerful widow made her a threat to the elite. The trial, they point out, lacked physical evidence beyond testimonies, many extracted under torture. No blood-soaked chambers were ever found, and the ledger listing victims is missing from archives. Others, like Tony Thorne, counter that the sheer volume of witnesses, over 300, suggests some truth to the accusations. Even if exaggerated, the number of victims, likely closer to 50 than 600, still marks her as one of history's most prolific serial killers. If the charges are true, the truth lies in a murky middle. A noblewoman with a cruel streak, perhaps mentally unstable from epilepsy or isolation, caught in a web of superstition and political greed. To ground this in something tangible, consider how myths grow. In Elizabeth's time, oral tradition and early print media amplified rumors, much like social media today. A 1611 letter from a local noble mentions fearful